Good to see you this morning. I always pray that you will all be here on this particular day, and you usually are, because the proclamation is so very important. By the way, we want to tell you, if you've not heard about it yet, that we now have live streaming. We live stream all of the services from here in the sanctuary, and I'll give you one brief example of how powerful that is. Between the 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock services, I received an email from a friend and a church member who is working in the Kingdom of Bahrain, and he said, "Thank you, I was able to worship." His family is here. He's in Bahrain. He said, "Thank you, I was able to worship in Bahrain today." So it's a very powerful new ministry. Please remember it when you're out of town, or for those family members and loved ones who cannot be here on Sunday mornings. We've been reading through the Gospel of Mark during the season of Lent. I'll say this one more time. It's the oldest Gospel, and it's the briefest Gospel in so many ways. It is really powerful. And today we read the resurrection story. I'll read it from the screen with you. Now, after he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went out and told those who had been with him while they were mourning and weeping. But when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they would not believe it. I want you to pay some attention to that particular verse. You can do this when you go home this afternoon. It won't take you but a few minutes. You can read through the 4 Gospels, turn to the last page or two of the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and every one of the Gospels will tell you about disciples who refused to believe that he was risen. The Gospel of Luke says he believed that it was a foolish story, an idle tale. They all tell about the doubts and the fears of the early disciples. After this, he appeared in another form to 2 of them as they were walking into the country. And when they went back and told the rest, but they did not believe them. Later, he appeared to the 11 themselves as they were sitting at the table. And he upbraided them for their lack of faith and stubbornness, because they had not believed those who saw him after he had risen. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Phillips Brooks was a great 19th century preacher, hellfire and brimstone, powerful, powerful preacher. You may not know that name, but you do know his work because he was the author of the Christmas carol, "O Little Town of Bethlehem." One day in the middle of the week, he received a letter. He opened the envelope and took it out, and there was one page there, and only one word was on the letter. It said, "Fool." Right there in the middle of the piece of paper in great big letters. "Fool" is all that it said. Suspecting that it was a member of his congregation who'd sent it to him, he stood in the pulpit the next Sunday, and he said, "I want to read a letter to you that I received this past week." And with great fanfare, he brought out the letter, opened the envelope, and pulled it out. He said, "This is what it says. It's just one word. It says, fool, F-O-O-L, fool." And then he folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. He said, "Through the years, I've received lots of anonymous letters. Letters where there is a message but no signature. But this is the first time I've ever received a letter where there is a signature but no message." Well, I think in some ways that gets right to the heart of what we struggle with during this Easter season. I don't know about you, but I have all sorts of friends, wise, intelligent, and sophisticated. And I never want to be the kind of Christian that is considered to be a fool. That was the problem with the disciples, wasn't it? The disciples, even without intelligent and sophisticated friends, when the word came back that Jesus had risen, from multiple sources over and over again, they refused to believe. Luke says that they considered it to be an idle or foolish tale. None of us want to be considered foolish, do we? I think I know who you are this morning. I think I know most of you pretty well in one way or the other. And so I think there are 4 categories of people that are here in the sanctuary this morning. The first category would be what I call deeply committed Christians who have practically no doubts whatsoever about this story. If you're one of those, I think you're one of the few, and you should count your blessings. The second category is a much larger group of people, I believe. Christians who are deeply, deeply committed, but who nevertheless have lots and lots of questions about this story and other parts of the Bible. I consider myself to be a part of that group. I consider myself to be a person of deep faith, and it grows as I grow older. And yet I have lots of questions. Honestly, after 40 years of ministry, I've buried too many children and teenagers. I've seen too much tragedy to not have lots of questions. Some of you have heard me say this before. I've said it on a number of occasions. If I'm lucky enough to stand at the pearly gates, I've got questions, lots of them. My wife sometimes reminds me that I just need to kind of focus on getting to the pearly gates in the first place, not worry about the questions so much. There's a third category of people. You may be in this group. You are Christian, but maybe becoming more and more nominal Christian in name only. You've always been a Christian, you've always believed, but now you've read about the Big Bang Theory, you've read about quantum mechanics, and the doubts have been increasing and increasing and increasing. The faith, your faith, you've been losing it over time. And then a fourth category. Some of you are here because of your family. You're not a believer. Maybe you once were a believer. Maybe you've never been a believer. But you came here to be a part of a cultural event that you enjoy, or to be with your family. Except for this part. Tell me if this isn't true. You would believe this story if you could. All of us would believe this story if we could. Who would not want to believe this story? Let me review it for you one more time. Created by God. The Bible tells us in Psalms that God knitted us together in the wombs of our mothers, created by love with God, by God. Cast out of the garden, what I call living east of Eden. We live east of Eden, don't we? The Bible tells a simple story about Adam and Eve disobeying God. He drove them out of the garden, so now we live east of Eden, and we know what that's like, whether you're a believer or not. We live in a world where we have so much freedom, we can't possibly make the good decision or the right decision all of the time. Whatever language you want to use to describe it, we are all failures. We all make mistakes. We are all sinners. We live east of Eden. But the story continues. Even cast out of the garden, God came with us. The Bible tells us about a God that continues to love us in the midst of our mistakes, and the powerful, powerful ability of God to redeem even the worst of us, to redeem our lives. And then the story, the way in which the story ends, a God who takes endings and turns them into beginnings, a God who takes the cross and turns it into a symbol of victory, the God who takes the grave and transforms it into a new beginning. Who wouldn't want to believe that story? 3 or 4 weeks ago, maybe 5, Kim Hill and I were talking. Kim is our Director of Operations and our General Counsel. We were sitting around, it was right after the Academy Awards. I don't see very many movies, so I don't get too excited about the Academy Awards, but she'd seen them and she's excited, and she knows that I have kind of a passing amateurish interest in physics and astrophysics. And so she was telling me about the movie, The Theory of Everything, the story of the love affair between Stephen Hawking and his first wife. I actually heard a lecture by Stephen Hawking one time, live lecture. I was as close to him as I am to you all. So she knew I had an interest in this, and she said, you know, you really ought to see that one movie. If you don't see the others, see The Theory of Everything. It's a great movie. And I said, well, Kim, I know it is, but, you know, especially springtime, going inside a dark building in a theater, I just hate it. I'd rather be outside. I don't want to do that. She said, you don't have to. It's on demand now. You can see it on demand. I said, what do you mean on demand? What is... You're not going to believe this. There's this button on your remote control. I The next Sunday afternoon, I went home, I was alone, I get out my remote control, I found the button on demand, and I pushed that thing, and honestly, it took me no more than maybe 30 minutes to find the theory. Okay, you laugh, and I'm going to tell you, some of you, it might take you longer because you're not as technically advanced as I am. But look, it's a great movie. It's a wonderful love story about Stephen Hawking and his first wife. But there's a subplot in this movie, and it's about Stephen Hawking's quest for the holy grail of physics, which is the theory of everything. The theory that explains the Big Bang, the theory that explains the earth blossoming into life, the theory which explains you and me, the theory which will predict the end of it all. And at the end of the movie, as the credits roll, there's a graphic that comes along. You've seen it. It says, Stephen Hawking is now 72 years old. He's still searching for the theory of everything. Of course he is. Of course he is, because this is the theory of everything. This is the theory of everything that tells us about a God who is both Alpha and Omega. It tells about the human being not as some kind of molecular or biological accident, but as one who is created by the love of God in the womb of his mother. It tells us about a God who loves us and sustains us even while we are east of Eden. It tells us about a God who has the power to take terrible things and turn them into new beginnings. God is Alpha and Omega, created by God, loved by God, sustained by God in this life and into life everlasting. That is the theory of everything. There's this old Native American saying that goes like this: sometimes you have to see it in order to believe it. But there are other times when you have to believe it in order to see it. You have to see it in order to believe it. That's the story of Doubting Thomas, isn't it? Some of you have read that story in the Gospel of John. Doubting Thomas, the last of the disciples to come to faith, he said, not until I see Jesus with the wounds in his hands and in his side, not until I see him with my own eyes will I believe this story. And Jesus finally appeared to him, but Jesus says, blessed are those who will never see me, but who will believe. Sometimes you have to see it in order to believe it, but other times you simply have to believe it until the day arrives when you can see it, and it's so obvious, so obvious. A few years ago, we had a plumber in our home. This was probably 15 years ago. I don't remember what was broken, but I remember he was down in our kitchen under my kitchen sink. Great big guy. I don't know how he got under there. He was so big. So I guess he was working on a garbage disposal or something. And he was down there. I could hear him working. I love talking to these guys because I'm not any good at that kind of thing. And I love trying to figure out how they do what they do. And so we were talking back and forth. And at one point in the conversation, he said, Mr. Underwood, what do you do for a living? And I said, well, I'm a Methodist preacher. And all of a sudden he stopped. I heard him drop the wrench. And he came out from under that sink and he stood up and he said, you know, I've had some really unusual things happen to me. Some really unusual things happen to me. Do you have time for me to tell you a story or two? Honestly, I wasn't too sure. I was paying him $90 an hour. I looked at my watch. I said, how long is this going to knock? I didn't do that, I promise. I said, yeah, I'd like to hear your story. And he told me 3 stories, remarkable stories, really about supernatural encounters. One after the other, he told me. And when he finished, he said, "Tell me something. Do you think that was God, or do you think that was something else?" And I said, "Well, you tell me, did those stories, those events, did they change your life in any way at all?" He said, "Oh, yeah." He said, they changed everything about me. They changed the way in which I think about my life. They changed the way in which I think about and do my work. They changed the way in which I love my wife. It changed the way in which I have raised my daughters. I said to him, "Do you think it was God, or do you think it was something else?" And this big burly plumber started weeping in my kitchen. He just broke down and started weeping, and through his tears he said, "I think it was God. I think it was God." And I said, "So do I." I want you to hear what I'm about to say, because I think this is the most important thing you will ever hear. Either God is or God isn't. Either God is everything or God is nothing. And if God is everything, it will change your life. It will change the way in which you think about your life. It will change the way in which you think about your children and your spouse, your friends, your neighbors, your co-workers. It will change everything about you. Either God is everything or God is nothing. And so I plead with you this morning, if you're like the original disciples and like so many here today, if you have your doubts, let me encourage you to believe it long enough until you can see it. It will change your life forever.